before Jesus, who was Braden?
Alright. Do I go? Okay. Can I start? Life before Jesus, I was always chasing for friends, approval, always being addicted to alcohol, being greedy with money, begging for everything I always wanted. But deep down inside me, I wasn't finding any happiness. And that was really hard, going to a deep depression and anxiety, even suicide with it as well. And it was the hardest thing before I met Christ and before I met this church. Ever since I met Jesus, it has been the greatest thing in my life. You know, having a friend invite me for the first time was really great. You know, I never had that in my life at all, having an invite to like a birthday party or anything like that. But ever since I kept coming to this church, I stopped drinking. I stopped seeking depression. I still have a little bit of anxiety. But reading the Bible, worshiping Jesus is the greatest thing that I have ever done in my life. Getting to know Jesus has brought me joy and happiness, and he has freed me from the pain, and he has freed me from the flesh.
Braden, where are you at? Braden, everybody, seriously. The way we ended your video last week, if I didn't know your story, I was like, bro, that sucks. Because we only showed the first half, but I love that second half where you talk about not seeking depression. That's a crazy word choice, by the way, for that. I love that. Not seeking depression. But also the fact that you said you still struggle with a little bit of anxiety. That's what the Christian walk is about. That's what the Christian walk, it's not being perfect, Braden. You're not perfect. None of us are. I'm not, you're not. But you acknowledge that you need Jesus. So guys, seriously, Braden stepped up and was so courageous sharing that story. So good. So good. Well, welcome. If I haven't met you, my name is Robert. It is nice to meet you guys today. Shout out to some of the new people. I met one of my new students. I don't know where he's at. He's here somewhere, I hope. If my boys lost him, then that's on you guys. I handed him to you guys. So there he is. What's up, my man? But seriously, so glad that you guys are here. How many of you were here for last week? We started this 2-week series. This is part 2, essentially, of Funeral for the Flesh. So we have this giant coffin up here. And if you weren't here last week, you're like, what the crap is happening at this church? This is not a funeral, don't worry. Well, it is, but it's not. But the thing is last week we talked about all these different things that we have that hold us back. These things called the fruit of the flesh, right? And we had examples over here on stage that I walked across the stage, one at a time, moving over here, calling you guys to identify with something that you need to put to death. Something of your flesh that you need to put to death. And we literally put them in the coffin. How many of you guys had, you don't have to raise your hand, had a deep small group after that? I guarantee you my group did. And I hope you guys did too, because we talked about this idea of admitting the issue, asking for help, and allowing room for the word. So I hope that you guys have been able to do that. And last week our main idea was death to the flesh. Well, this week is part 2 of 2. And this week I want you to see this. This is our bottom line right here. Called by the Spirit. Everybody say, called by the Spirit. Called by the Spirit. Because once we've put stuff to death in the coffin, we start to see different fruit. We talked about the fruit of the flesh last week that did not look like this. It was other things. But once we put that fruit of the flesh to death, we're able to really jump into the fruit of the Spirit. So tonight, I want to teach from I'm going to have a few verses, but this is the one verse. Super simple, literally 14 words, but it's such a huge verse. You ready for this? Check this out. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Did you guys, when you were in elementary school, did you ever swing? Did you guys have swings? Some of you had a sad childhood. None of you raise your hand. How many of you swung, okay? And this is probably childish of me, and maybe I'm going to date myself here and say that I'm old, but some of the leaders can probably attest to this. You ever on the swing with somebody, there's a girl next to you, and you're swinging, and you start swinging at the exact same time, same motion, you're like, we're married. Nobody? A few of you guys are like, yep, that's me. See, that's what we're talking about when we say being in step with the Spirit, right? You're swinging next to this person, and you're like, oh my gosh, we're both doing this. But that's what we're talking about with the Spirit. The Spirit of God is we're literally taking steps, and the Spirit is doing those exact same steps. That's what it means to be in step. So here's the thing. If you want to live the most fruitful life with God, you got to pay attention to being in step with the Spirit. And we're going to talk about how do you do that today. But before we do that, would you guys pray with me? Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for these kids. Thank you for these students, God, these young men and young women, Lord, that are here to learn about you, or maybe they're here for the first time and they're like, I don't know what I'm getting myself into. Well, Lord, I ask that you would speak to each and every person in this room. God, would you take any words that are not from you away from me and give me words only from you and from your Spirit. Lord, let me be in step with your Spirit today. And everybody said, amen. How many of y'all watched the Super Bowl? Come on. All right, I heard one of my boys yell, go Chiefs. How many of you were glad about the outcome of the Chiefs winning? How many of you are now done crying about it and can admit that you were cheering for the Eagles? So less of you, some of you are still ashamed and you didn't want to admit it. That's okay. So my brother's a big Eagles fan. And I was tempted to put up a picture of him, but I took this picture. I'll explain this to you. My brother's a big Eagles fan. Okay, so I don't care. I'm not a big football guy. Like, I just really don't care. So I was like, Chiefs, Eagles, whatever. Whoever wins, whatever. I'm here for the commercials. I'm here to watch this halftime show, which was boring, by the way. I knew that would get a rile out of you. I will say this. Nothing made it spectacular, and nothing made it boring. It was consistently okay. So anyway, my brother's an Eagles fan. So when my whole family came over to celebrate the Super Bowl at my house, a non-football house, we said, okay, we're just adopting the Eagles because that's my brother's team. He's going to be here. Great, we're rooting for the Eagles. So we're rooting for the Eagles. My brother, my goodness, that last 5 minutes of that game, I thought he was done. I thought he was going to quit. I'm serious. So they lose, and my brother goes outside, and we got a wall on our back, out of our backyard on the backside. It's like 6 feet up. He literally climbs up there, and he just sits there like this. I kid you not, for like 30 minutes. My 2-year-old daughter's like, can I go see Mimi? And my mom is like, let's give him a minute. Let's let him have a minute because now might not be the best time. But I took a picture of him. So I told him I might turn it into a meme in the future for our Instagram, so you can be watching out for that. But here's the thing. 113 million people tuned in. Is that the correct stat, Jeff, I believe? Okay, well, that's nice. 113 million people, I believe, tuned into this game. They tuned into this game whether it was their team or not. We're not talking 113 million Eagles and Chiefs fans. We're talking 113 people as a whole. Me being one of them. I don't care, but I still watched it. When you think about a football team, the Eagles and the Chiefs had been preparing for that day since a year prior. So the Super Bowl just ended, but these teams are now preparing for the next Super Bowl. Why is that? When you think about football, how many of you play baseball? When you think about baseball, how many of you play basketball? How many of you guys play pickleball? Wow, okay, like the adults are like, yeah, what's that? When you think about these sports teams, think about football specifically, what is the end game? What is the end goal that you are going for? It's to be a Super Bowl champ, right? That is everything that they are striving for. Unless you're LeBron James and you're just striving to be the top point scorer and not rings, but it's okay. But they are striving for the Super Bowl, right? So I got to thinking, us as Christians, what is our end goal? What is our end game? What is our Super Bowl? What is our championship? What's the trophy that we're looking for? So I started thinking about this, and I narrowed it down to a conversation Jesus had after he died, After he rose from the grave, he had this conversation with his disciples. And he gives us our end goal as Christians. Check this out. This is in Matthew 28. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Spirit, catch that. And teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. This verse right here, you can leave it up there. Did you catch it? There's two key commands that we get from Jesus. He tells us these two commands. Go and make disciples, baptize and teach them. Those might be four different things to you, but really it's go and make disciples, baptize then teach them. Those are two different commands that Jesus is giving. So you might be asking, Robert, what's a disciple? Good question. A disciple is somebody who decides to follow somebody else and learn from them, but also start to look and live like them. So when he says disciple, he's saying somebody who follows Jesus and begins to look and live like Jesus. So if I had to summarize our end goal, it would be these two. Number one, be a disciple. Number two, make a disciple. That's our end goal. Be a disciple, make a disciple. You can go to that next one, Austin. Be a disciple, make a disciple. Because I want you to see this. The way Jesus said it, it was backwards, right? He said, go and make disciples, baptizing and teaching them. But when we really look at our lives, when we really look at this, the be has to come before the make. And I want to explain what I mean. Nothing bothers me more than when people argue about movies and TV shows that they have not watched. You ever get those people? You get those people? You're like, oh my gosh, I love this show. And somebody goes, I hate that show, it's the worst. And you're like, why? They're like, I don't know, I've never seen it. What? Like, what are you talking about? Trey tried to do it with one of my shows at one point where he watched episode 1 and he's like, I'm done, but it's not a good show. No! You can't say that about my favorite show if you haven't watched my favorite show. Right? Because the prerequisite to you having an opinion is that you have to have watched or know about that thing that you are talking about. So how are we supposed to go make disciples if we don't even know what being a disciple is? That has to be first. The be has to come before the make, right? We have to be a disciple first. You see, tonight all we're talking about is being a disciple. Number one, being a disciple. Our next series in March is actually going to tackle go and make disciples. We're doing a whole series on how to go and make disciples. It's called evangelism. How do you tell your story? How do you share Jesus with the friends that you walk through the hall with? How do you share Jesus with the family members that disagree on faith? How do you share Jesus with people who have never heard him? We're going to do a whole series on that because it's that important. But see, here's the thing. If we go back to Galatians, you guys remember we started in Galatians last week. And I started with this idea of being bewitched. Do you remember that? The idea of it being enchanted, being completely enamored with something. Paul is writing this letter to those people that he says, you foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Who has taken over your mind for you to put aside Jesus and start going this way? Who's done that to you? Who's done that? And we started talking about the fruit of the flesh. Because if we become bewitched with something, we start seeing fruit, but it's not godly fruit. So he goes into this whole thing about how do you show fruit of the Spirit? Because a disciple should be bearing fruit, right? I got a question for you. How do you know that an orange tree is an orange tree? It's because the tree is orange. No. It's because when you look up on the tree, there's an orange on the tree. How do you know that an apple tree is an apple tree? How do you know that a lemon tree is a lemon tree? How do you know somebody's a follower of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus? I heard a lot of answers, but when we're talking about this idea of a tree, and Jesus talks a little bit about a tree, and we're going to see that in a little bit, but for us to be seen as a Jesus follower, there has to be some type of fruit coming from us that we're seeing. We have to be showing people what Jesus looks like. Somebody can't look at you and be like, wait, you follow who? Are you sure? Because I haven't seen that. Because I don't see that in your daily life. So Paul goes on to say this in Galatians. You ready? The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh. They've put death to their flesh. They've crucified the flesh. And with it, its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. This is what Paul's saying. So if you're a Jesus follower, someone should be able to see the characteristics of Jesus on you, right? You should be living your life to the point where love. They see you loving other people, right? Joy. It should be evident through your smile. It should be evident through the way you live your life. Patience. Ooh, that's a hard one. That's a hard one. They should see it when that person is really testing it, but you stay strong and you don't blow up. Because again, that's another one, self-control. They should know your faithfulness because you're being faithful to Jesus. They should know that. They should see it. But the problem is that when we start taking on these identifiers from other things, from the flesh, we don't get known as that guy who loves everybody. We don't get known as that girl who's really patient. We don't get known as, oh, those people who are very faithful. What we get known as is a sneakerhead. What we get known as is a drug addict. What we get known as is a thief, an alcoholic, a toxic friend. You see, what people see on you is going to be the fruit that you're bearing. So are you going to bear good fruit? Like love, goodness, peace? Or are you going to bear fruit of the flesh? These other things that they might look good to some of your friends, but when you really dig down deep, they hurt you. They're actually harming you. They're actually not helpful. They're not good. If somebody looks at you, what are they going to see? Because if everyone else in the world is showing the things that we put in the coffin, what happens when someone looks at the fruit of the Spirit that you are bearing? What happens? It begins to shine. You begin to see something glowing from you. You begin to only see the love and the joy and the peace of the fruit because it stands out, because it's different from culture. It's something that others aren't going to exhibit. It's something that people who haven't put their flesh in the coffin are going to show. Because that's going to cover it up. That's not going to let it shine. That's not going to let you see it. But when you remove it and you start showing fruit and you start handing fruit out and you start giving it to other people, this peace and this love and this joy and this patience and this goodness and all of these self-controls, the arguments stop. The friends are loved. You're left with something that culture looks at and goes, why are they like that? Why is that happening? Because here's the thing. The benefit of bearing and carrying fruit is actually for others. It's actually for feeding and nourishing. Did you know that all of these different fruits, these oranges and this apple, these bananas, this apple, this orange, do you know why the tree was okay with us plucking them off? Why can we take this? Because this bears nothing for the tree itself. The fruit is meant to be given out. Our fruit isn't meant necessarily to nourish us. God does that. Our fruit is to feed and nourish the people we are around. The love and the joy is for other people. How can we start thinking about making more disciples if we don't know how to be a disciple ourselves? So let me ask you this. How do we do it? How do we bear the fruit? Glad you asked. Great question. Here's the thing about fruit. Fruit is born through growth. I talked to you a little bit last week. I said I'm not a science teacher, but I do know that a tree will take the sunlight and it will turn it into energy. It'll take the nutrients from the ground and the fertilizer and it'll turn it into what fruit needs. it will take the water that it's been given and it will turn it into this. The fruit is taking all of this stuff from the tree and it is growing from a seed. Growth is crazy in nature. It really is. If you follow me on Instagram, you know this, but currently my daughter Thea is growing butterflies. I kid you not. Okay, here's the crazy thing. So my brother, who is the Eagles fan, who's not depressed anymore, don't worry. My brother bought her for Christmas this butterfly growing thing. We got this cage, this little net, and then we mail off a request for 5 caterpillars. And these caterpillars show up in a little jar with food, and you leave them literally in the jar, and then they come and you watch them grow. You literally watch them go from this big to like full caterpillar size. It was crazy. We didn't even know they were in there. We were like, where are they? But there were 5 of them in there. So then they form their chrysalis shell, right? That's how butterflies work. They go from being a caterpillar and they form this shell around themselves and they go into hibernation. And they sit there. And this is the worst for my 2-year-old because it's like 7 days. They're in these shells, sitting there. So then we take them out of that little jar. They're attached to the lid and they sit there on the ground, and 7 days later, a butterfly broke out of a chrysalis. And now we have 3 butterflies. Can you show that picture? We have 3 butterflies in our house. They're still in the little thing. There's one there, there's actually one below them, and there's one up there on the top. One has not hatched yet. We're hoping it hatches when we get home tonight because it looked like it was ready. But the crazy thing is we watched all of this stuff happen. And I don't know about you, but I don't understand how somebody can believe that nature can do that without God. I really don't, but that's a conversation for another day. But the thing is that fruit that is growing, the way nature grows things, fruit that is growing, it has to come through a growth process. Just like fruit grows, and just like butterflies grow, your spiritual life is growing. Your spiritual walk with Jesus is growing. And that's where the fruit is going to be bared. So I'm going to ask this again. So how do we grow? Great question again to clarify the point. I got one word. How do we grow? Abide. Have you ever heard that word? Has anybody heard the word abide? No. Many of you probably haven't, but check this out. Jesus explains this. Paul uses this fruit of the Spirit analogy. Jesus actually uses a tree analogy too. Watch this. John 15. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. This is Jesus talking. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered and thrown into the fire and burned. But if you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done. By this my Father is glorified. Ready? Here it is. That you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. We are shown as disciples when we abide in God. You see, the word abide, let me explain it. It means to stay. It means to sit. If I'm going to abide on this stage, I'm just going to sit here. This is me abiding with you. I'm staying here. I'm living in the moment. What Jesus is saying is, you can't be my disciples and make more disciples if you're not sitting and staying with me. You're not going to bear fruit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. You're not going to have any of that unless you literally sit and abide with him. Unless you sit in that moment with him constantly. When we start to abide in Jesus, we start to look like him more and more. Have you ever gotten a new pair of shoes? Like that pair that you always wanted. So Kaylee, my wife, got a pair for Christmas. I finally got her into the Nike family, guys. Come on, give it up for the Nike family. So she got her first pair of Nikes. Little leopard print, because you know that's her vibe. So she's got the white with the leopard print. I don't see any scuffs on here yet, so seriously, good job. But she got these shoes. And I remember the Christmas morning, she broke them out and she put her foot in them and she stood up and she was like, oh my gosh, they're tight. Might have got the wrong size. I was like, hey, hold up. Because anybody in the Nike family will tell you, these type of shoes you got to wear a couple times before they start to feel right. You got to wear them a couple times to break them in. Because what happens when you're wearing your shoe? The shoe itself is being formed and molded around your foot. You see, all these shoes come manufactured the same, but our feet don't. Your feet are different than my feet. Your feet are different than the person who's sitting next to you. I don't know, maybe one of you guys has like 6 toes. Who knows? I'm just kidding, but it's a thing. So your feet are different than mine. And what happens when we put on our shoes for the first time, they don't feel right. But the more we walk in them, the more the shoe itself begins to mold around the shape of our feet. Right? Why is that? Because it needs to match your perfect and unique foot shape and size. It works the same way with God. When we put God into ourselves, we begin to mold into what God looks like. We're the shoe. God's the foot. When we put God into us, we start to move and look more and more like Him. We start to shape and form like Him. Like the shoe molds to the wearer, we mold to who God is the more we put Him into our daily life. The fruit you bear is a reflection of the abiding that you've been doing. So let me ask you I'm coming to an end. Let me ask you a very important question. This is where the rubber meets the road, guys. This is where what you say and believe is put to the test. What are you abiding in? What are you putting into yourself and you're allowing it to shape you? Is it culture? Is it the music you're listening to? Is it the TV shows you're watching? Is it the friends that you're surrounding yourself with? Is it the lessons you're being taught at the public school? Or is it what you learn here on a Wednesday night? Is it the worship music that you're putting on in your car that tells you who you are? We just sang a song called Who You Say I Am because I don't care what culture says about you guys. You are children, daughters, and sons of the Father up in heaven. You are loved and accepted. I don't care what culture says. But you're not going to know that unless we're listening to things like that. Are you abiding in what you're reading in the Bible? Let me say this one more time. The fruit that you bear is a reflection of the abiding that you've done. If you want to bear fruit of the Spirit, what are you abiding in? In order to be, we have to abide so that we can bear the right fruit. In order to be, we have to abide in order to bear the right fruit. If you want to bear the fruit of the Spirit, we have to abide in Him. Would you guys pray with me tonight? Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for today. I thank you for who you are and everything that you say about us. I thank you that, Lord, it looks so hard to live a Christian life sometimes. It looks so hard to put aside all the different things that we're abiding in that aren't really you and to abide in what you have for us. I know it's hard. I know it's difficult, but God, I know these students want to bear fruit. I know these students don't want to bear fruit of a dead flesh. They want to bear fruit of a live spirit that is in them. They want to bear fruit of a Father who loves them. They want to bear fruit of you. So God, I ask that tonight, after all is said and done, after the worship songs are sung, and after we go to small groups, and then we throw the football around outside, and we help clean up, and we get in our car, and we shut the door, and we talk or ignore our parents, and then we drive home, and we get in bed, Lord, that we would know that we can abide in you, that we can sit in you, we can stay with you. And no matter what happens around us, no matter the darkness that we find ourselves in, the more we abide, the more we're going to shine. God, that is my prayer, that these students would go to school tomorrow and be shining of fruit of the Spirit. God, we love you and we thank you. And everybody said, Amen.